Microsoft released some new information about Xbox Game Pass, and it doesn't look good. Or does it? One of my favorite things that public companies are required to do is to disclose their financial information. Now, they do this every quarter, and when they have an annual shareholder meeting, they also put out information relating to that event because it can impact share pricing and just investor relations, and that is what we are talking about today. So on November 30th, Microsoft will be holding their annual shareholder meetings where, investors can come and vote on resolutions, talk about board members, and drive policy, and complain, and do other things. But one of the things that comes out of this is that Microsoft has to release information relating to that event, and that is what they have done. And there's some news buried in there about Xbox Game Pass. Now, some of this news doesn't look good, but you need to put it in context because it's actually not nearly as upsetting as I think some of the headlines are going to make this out to be. So let's just dive into the information about what has actually been talked about. So Microsoft announced in this disclosure form that for the 12 months that ended on June 30th, so effectively think last fiscal year that ended on June 30th, they said that Xbox Game Pass subscriber growth was up 37%, but, and this is a big but the company had set a goal of 48% growth. So what does this mean? So Satya Nadella, the CEO of the company, his compensation, and there are other senior leaders inside the company, are tied to growth metrics. That is how they will get their stock options and other boosts onto their baseline salary. And so what Microsoft does, and the board and the shareholders, they will set growth targets, and if they meet that growth target, then they will get a bonus based off of meeting that metric. Now, they can also get partial bonuses. It can get really complicated, but effectively they said, hey, if Xbox Game Pass growth is at 48%, you will get your maximum allowed compensation for that metric. And of course, now we know they didn't hit that target. They hit 37% of 48. So it's not like Game Pass shrunk or anything. It only grew at 37% instead of 48, which was the target. Now, one of the things, the reason why this might be a little bit more concerning is that in the prior fiscal year, not the last fiscal year, but the previous one, the growth target was 71% and it actually grew 86%. So Microsoft in the previous fiscal year exceeded the growth target, and this year they came up short. Now, keep in mind that sometimes it's absolutely harder to grow larger numbers on a percentage basis, if you think about it, which is why the percentages were smaller, right? It's much easier to go from 1 to 2 than it is from 20 to 40, right? It's just math at the end of the day. So keep that in mind as we look through some of these numbers. It's not that the Game Pass didn't grow, it's that it didn't meet the target that Microsoft had set out. So there's a little bit more information in there. We already know the 18 million figure. Microsoft has talked about that. And then there's that 30 million figure that's floating out there. And this kind of makes things a little bit awkward now. Knowing that they didn't hit their Game Pass target, does that mean that 30 million number is not accurate? Microsoft has not officially released an update since that 18 million figure, and so we don't quite know. Now, there's a couple things also to keep in mind too, is that Microsoft will report earnings next week. They're getting this information out ahead of that. Hopefully next week we will actually hear a number about Game Pass subscribers. I think at this point we're probably overdue. I think it might be not underwhelming, but underreported about how many, or maybe come up short of what we all think. I'm not quite sure. I'm just basing this off of the disclosure. We know that there was growth for the service. We just don't know how much growth over that 18 million. And now that we know that it came up short of some of their metrics, does that mean that those metrics were saying, hey, look, if we had 48% growth, then we're going to be at 30 million? We don't know that answer yet. And so that's where that 30 million number keeps floating around. It might come back to bite Microsoft in the butt, which is probably why they didn't want it out there in the first place. But hopefully next week we will learn more. So just keep that in mind. Now, why might have Game Pass subscriber growth come up short? Well, let's just put some real obvious nuggets out there. First of all, consoles are still hard to get, right? You still can't walk into a Best Buy and just grab one off the shelf in your dirty little paws and just walk out the door. Getting a console is still tough, so that very likely had an impact on potential Game Pass subscriber growth. Also, keep in mind that one of their blockbuster titles that was supposed to launch during that fiscal year was Halo Infinite, and it did not launch. There's another reason why Game Pass subscriber growth may have missed its target. You take out a Quad A, whatever, the hero title of the Xbox platform didn't launch when they expected it to, and there you go. You start to put together a narrative as to why they missed. But when you start thinking about what's next for Game Pass here, there's a lot going on. I suspect that they will have solid growth this quarter because there's big games launching. We talked about this yesterday in a video. In the next quarter, there's going to be Forza Horizon 5. I keep wanting to say 4. The next edition of Forza Horizon, we have Age of Empires 4, and we also have Halo Infinite. Those are 3 mega titles for Microsoft that are likely going to be funneling people into Xbox Game Pass, because this fits the Game Pass narrative exactly as Microsoft intended. Because let's just, $60 baseline, that's $180 worth of games you could potentially buy. So I know pricing can vary a lot. But if you jump into Game Pass, then you get it all for one low monthly fee, although you don't actually own the games, you're just renting the ability to play them. That aside, Microsoft's next quarter more than likely drive significant Game Pass growth, which then makes me wonder, it's like, geez, are they going to wait until after the holiday season when they expect this growth to occur before they go and report it? So there's other notes to keep in mind as well. Microsoft Surface, like this hardware, and like Microsoft Teams, which is a blockbuster product from Microsoft, have also missed growth targets in the past. This is not something that's exclusive to Xbox Game Pass at the end of the day. Microsoft sets goals. They are exactly that, goals that they are targeting for. Sometimes you meet your goals, sometimes you didn't. It's not like the service shrank in user base. It just did not grow at 48%. It only grew at about 37%. So that is what's driving the news here, is that Microsoft just didn't hit their target. So you're going to see a lot of headlines this week of Microsoft they can't make their Game Pass is in trouble. And so it's not a full representation of how the service is maturing. And as with all businesses, success is not a straight line. It's not a hockey stick. Very rarely, it's a very rare hockey stick that it just goes straight up, right? It's a bumpy path to success and subscriber growth. You can look at things like Netflix. They bounce around, but they're generally considered a very healthy and sustainable service. And so I think that is just the path that Xbox Game Pass is going on. But it's going to be interesting to see how much they talk about this at their shareholder meeting, because while it is a component of Satya Nadella's CEO overall compensation, it's a relatively small part. But you got to remember that Microsoft put the emphasis on the service revenue coming from Xbox rather than hardware revenue and console sales. That was Microsoft's own decision, because again, they've told us time and time again that the future of Xbox is going to be software as a service. Hardware is merely a means to that end, right? So the narrative isn't perfectly complete to say, look, console shortages came up short, and that's why they didn't make the Game Pass subscriber numbers. Because in theory, based on Microsoft's own strategy, everybody who has an Xbox console previously should be signing up for Xbox Game Pass, just like you should be subscribing here if you're still listening at this point. So just keep all that in mind as Microsoft comes out with new information next week during earnings and at the November 30th shareholder meeting, because that is very clearly going to be a topic of conversation, because Microsoft is investing a lot of dollars. Remember, they've bought Bethesda for billions of dollars. They're dumping a significant amount of cash into Game Pass, and shareholders are going to demand a return for that, rightfully so. If you're putting that type of capital into a product, you should be getting a return on that investment. Now, the question is the return acceptable to these shareholders to continue and sustain the development of Xbox Game Pass? I think it would be crazy for them to just cut it off and say, look, 37% growth is not good enough and we should stop investing dollars. I don't think that's the narrative, and I think Microsoft would be crazy, because right now they have a very good narrative going where the Xbox brand offers the best value, including the Xbox Series S, which is an exceptionally priced console and the easiest way to get into these titles. And they also know that Xbox Game Pass is a fantastic marketing tool, not only for their own product, but for third parties as well. So that is the news that's making the headlines around today about the Xbox Game Pass. There's a little bit more color and context. I really hope that Microsoft actually gives us some numbers next week during their financial earnings, but we'll find out. We don't know. We will learn more as Microsoft gives us information. And if you want to stay updated on everything that's happening in the world of Xbox and Microsoft, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.